First, congrats. This is such
Thank
great
you.
news. I'm so excited for you. My jaw was literally on the floor when I saw the pictures.
Thank you. I'm not even wearing it right now. I like just woke up from a nap. I was traveling for work. My God, my alarm. So I was like scrambling.
Oh my gosh.
Thank
Well,
you.
thank you for coming on. Where were you traveling for work?
Of course. I was in Rome on Monday, and yesterday I was in
Oh
Madrid.
my gosh. Okay, so what are you doing for work now?
Yeah.
How did you find your job?
I am an executive assistant right now
Okay.
for Stryker. They're based out of Michigan, so it makes it a little easier. Everybody, for the most part, speaks English. I'm kind of learning that not all of the teams are super fluent, and that is okay. So we try our best to communicate.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's been really great. My boss is Irish, so it makes it a little bit easier for myself, but it's been really amazing. I've only been working there for 2 months now,
Mm-hmm.
but I love it.
And
So
how did you
yeah.
find it? Is there like some sort of like Europe LinkedIn that you're using, or is it just LinkedIn?
Honestly, that classic LinkedIn, I was at my past job, just on the job, looking for another job, and just kind of worked out and worked pretty seamlessly over Christmas and then started in February and got lucky.
Oh my gosh, well, congrats. It's amazing.
Thank
And
you.
you've been
Thank
traveling
you.
literally everywhere. So, how many countries have you even been to this year alone? Like, it's just April.
This year alone, I think like 5 countries or so, which
Okay.
isn't as impressive as some of my friends, to be completely honest, but it's obviously easier, a little bit easier here than what it is in the US, but we'll get to that part.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so let's start from the beginning. How did you even end up in Europe?
Well, I have a bit of a non-traditional experience, I
Mm-hmm.
suppose. My fiance is Irish, so we are living in Europe. He moved here 2 years ago, and I moved here just last August, so I've been here for about 8 months. I got really lucky with job placement. I just worked as a receptionist. Super simple job, nothing too heavy duty, anything like that for my first couple of months. And then, like I said, I just started my new job recently. But visa wise, I actually don't even have my residence permit. That's one thing you'll learn if you ever try to
What?
move to the Netherlands is it's a little bit of a slow process. We're hoping that it comes soon, but yeah, so but I can legally work here. That's the
Wait, wait,
important
wait.
part.
Okay, so you have a work visa, you just don't have a residence visa?
So I'm on a partner visa, or I should
Okay.
be on a partner visa. That's what we're working towards. But while you're waiting for a decision, you can work. So that's the important thing.
Okay.
But eventually I'll have a residence permit. So, and then I believe you could have a residence permit for up to 5 years. And then when you live within the country for 5 years, you can become a citizen.
Okay. And then when you first got there, so you moved to Amsterdam and
Mhm.
you're trying to find a job, like how do you do that considering that you don't have a permit of residence there?
Right. So again, I think that situation based, I was just very fortunate.
Hmm.
I had connections that worked within Uber.
Okay.
And, I just kind of had referrals and had people kind of talk on my behalf, and it was just a little bit easier. I had also worked for Uber in the past,
Hmm.
just in the corporate sphere versus the hospitality sphere. So it was a little bit different. Again, I have kind of odd experiences when it comes to how I got over here and all of those things. But yeah, it just kind of worked out again. But if anyone were trying to move over here, obviously the biggest hiccup is the visa situation, and not everyone is always going to have a partner like I do. Very grateful for him and his all of that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think that that's probably the hardest part is finding a job. But I also think that at the same time, if you were driven enough and you kind of had a resume that was, I guess, what's a good word? If employers were interested in your resume,
Right.
then I think that they would definitely be open to sponsoring you. It's
Hmm.
just a little bit more work heavy visa wise for them, and it costs money, obviously. So they're not always going to just hire anybody off the street. But what I was working up to say is that a lot of companies do still speak English here, unless you're working specifically for a Dutch company.
Hmm.
Probably 4 out of 5 times you're going to be speaking English. I haven't learned any Dutch yet.
Wow.
We'll see when I get to that point. I'm a little bit afraid. I think that it's a language that you definitely have to be super, super immersed
Hmm.
in, and I'm not necessarily immersed in it as much as I probably should be because, again, I work for a predominantly English speaking company right now.
Right. Which is just so funny to think that you consider yourself to not be immersed in the language when you live in a country that speaks that as their like primary language. But yeah, no, I get what
Yeah.
you're saying. That is a really weird anomaly, I guess, of
Hmm.
you feeling like, okay, I don't even know where to begin with this language because it's not something I encounter daily because it's not something that my company speaks. So, how
Right.
often do you find yourself facing language barriers?
I think that that's one thing that I do really appreciate about Amsterdam versus, obviously I was just traveling again for work and I was in smaller cities. I was just outside of the bigger cities, and you definitely run into that a bit more,
Hmm.
is having that bit of a language barrier. But because, again, I'm probably only 10 minutes outside of the city bike riding. I really don't face that too much. And I think that I guess I'm fortunate that way. But I think that the further you go away from the main tourist hubs, the more you're going to run into those types of issues, if you will.
Right.
But it's not anything big here, and I think that it's such a melting pot, and there are so many people from all over the world, all walks of life, that you kind of just have to speak English. So I think that that's also that's a commonality across big cities within Europe. But if you are looking to move to a little village in Italy, it might be a little bit different.
Right, exactly. And it's probably also difficult to find a job in a little town in Italy or a little town
Exactly, right,
anywhere.
right.
Yeah, I mean, that's really good advice because I feel like when you move to a large city in Europe, you do speak a good portion of English. Like, I've never had any issues when I was traveling abroad
Hmm.
of trying to
Right.
figure out what people are saying, trying to understand what they mean. Like until
Hmm.
you leave the city and you go to like some like what you're saying, a smaller town,
Hmm.
you really face no obstacles with that. And
Right,
I
right.
feel like the part about the visa of working for a company like Uber, who is a world-renowned company, it's not
Hmm.
atypical for them to have some sort of sponsorship program where they are
Right.
able to afford sponsorships. And I feel like when you go to
Hmm.
those smaller towns, it's probably more common for you to need to speak a second language, and it's beneficial to you that you also
Right.
are fluent in English.
Right. Yeah, it absolutely would not hinder you. I'm sure they would be even more inclined to bring you on.
Hmm.
But again, they just have to feel as though you're an investment. You are an investment, and they have to feel as though you're a big enough investment, I suppose, to be able to gamble and bring you over. Because again, I mean, even just being here on a partner visa, it is a process. It does take time. I do think it's a little bit quicker, luckily, if you were to have a work visa, because, they can kind of snap their fingers and maybe flash a little money and you're good. But beyond that, I think that having an impressive resume and just being able to really speak upon yourself and your talents and all of those things would just be really important. Again, I still had to kind of do that to an extent. Obviously, I was still interviewing for my job. I had multiple interviews and all of that. And I work for a vice president of neurovascular. So it's still a very corporate heavy job, I suppose.
Yeah, and I feel like your incentive of like someone seeing potential in you or seeing the growth opportunity in you or seeing the investment in you is that you already are working towards a
Hmm.
partner visa. Like you are there. I feel
Right.
like the difficulty for the people that are like me that are only wanting to move there for 1 or 2 years, it's like, okay, we're going to invest
Hmm.
money in this person and then what? They're going to move back to the United States? Like,
Right.
what is the gain in that?
I mean, I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing though either, because you could do, in my mind, one of two things. You could be upfront and frank about it and be like, look, I would really love to work for your company for a few years. But then I guess one thing to think about is you could just work for an American company that is international or it is global. And again, I work for Stryker. They're based out of Michigan.
Yeah.
Uber is based out of California. Like there are plenty of really big companies really all over Europe. Many of them have headquarters actually specifically in Dublin. It makes it very easy for a lot of Americans. It's very expensive right now, but anyways, but Philips is really big here. I mean, there's plenty of companies that you could definitely probably do, even if you started out in the US and then you did a transfer, or, vice versa. I had lived in Australia 2 years ago. I was working for a company called Cognizant, not sure where they're based out of, but it is another American company. I worked for them for a couple of years. And while they didn't necessarily do the transfer for me, I was able to stay with the company and move there for a few months, and it just kind of worked out. So there's definitely always ways that you can kind of work around and find some loopholes if you were really driven enough. So one more thing actually, and if you have a remote job, sometimes companies, as long as like you might come back every once in a while, sometimes they're okay with you just like going and working different hours. It just depends on your relationship with your manager.
Yeah, no, and that's a really good point. And I feel like the trend towards virtual jobs or remote jobs is happening at a lot of different companies because they're realizing that,
Hmm.
okay, why would we pay all of this money for a corporate building or a corporate headquarters when we could just have people work from
Right.
home and do the same quality of work? So I feel like there is a huge trend in that, and there is a lot of ability to do that. It's just like what you said. If you're driven to do it, you'll
Hmm.
find a way to do it. And although those companies aren't as frequently found as the companies that you have to work at in
Right.
person, it's just a little bit of that extra step that you have to take in order to be able to work abroad or live abroad.
Absolutely. And I'm technically hybrid myself, but I maybe go into the office once or twice a month. And again, because I have that communication with my manager and he's totally fine with it. So I'm very fortunate. I will actually be coming back to the US for 2 weeks and he'll also be in the US. So kind of closing that gap with the time difference is really great. But he's kind of just, and I'm very fortunate. It's not that all managers are like that, but when you do find a great manager like that, it makes all the
Oh,
difference.
yeah, 100%. Okay, and then aside from work and managing to find all of these jobs, what is life living or what is it like living in a city or a country that you're not all that familiar with? You don't know the language, you're
Mhm.
really not that familiar with the food. Like, how do you navigate that and
Right.
make that your norm?
I definitely think that one thing that I would love for people to understand is that, we live in the world of social media and it can be such an amazing tool and I use it every day, all the time. But, life isn't an Instagram reel. And I think that a lot of people think that they're going to move to Europe and you're just going to be free nilly and you're just kind of doing whatever. And within my first month, I didn't have my job. I moved in August and I started on September 1st. It was totally like that. It was bliss. It was amazing. I didn't have to worry about anything. And I was going to markets at 11 a.m. I was going to the gym at, whatever hour I wanted. But, and I do still have a lot of flexibility in my work right now. But I think that people need to realize that you're still probably mostly going to be working a relative 9 to 5, something like that. And again, some people may have flexibility within that, but if Amsterdam is an expensive city, if you were going to live in one of the main hubs within Europe, you're probably still going to be paying a decent amount for rent, or if you have a car, all of those same things that you're still paying for in the US. It's not always going to be rainbows and sunshine. Although I am still incredibly, incredibly grateful to have the opportunity to live here. I just think that people really need to be realistic in that fact. And that's not me being a Debbie Downer at all. I just want that people to know that when you're coming to Europe, it's not going to be like that European summer. It could be.
Yeah.
If you make enough money, it totally could be. But I think that, there are days where even now I'm like, oh gosh, I wish I was like out on a boat on the canal or something like that. But I still have to do my normal everyday things that I was still doing in the US. I've got to work, I've got to go get groceries, I've got to, have that normal lifestyle that's sustainable.
Right.
And of course, with on my social media, I was just in Iceland for a week and that was amazing and it was incredibly beautiful. But then I come back and I still had to work, like it's just finding that balance of being able to have that kind of European summer mentality all the time, but also being able to live your normal life. And it's not always going to be super exciting and all those things.
Oh, yeah, no, and I think that's a really good point of mentioning that life is not a highlight reel. Like, there are things that you need to do in order to do the things that you want to do. And the things that you need to
Exactly.
do in this case scenario is have a life and have a job that supports that life. So, although you're in Europe,
Hmm.
it's just like what you're saying, you need
Yeah.
to make sure that you're putting yourself and your needs first and not
Hmm.
fulfilling this fantasy or romanticizing this entire life that's going to exist because
Hmm.
that's going to just set you up for a letdown of
Right, right.
why did I move here? I'm experiencing the exact same thing. So no, I feel like that, if anything, is just like the most realistic piece of advice that it's not rainbows and sunshine all of the time.
Hmm. It totally can be most of the time, but there are times where, it's not possible. And unless you were working like maybe a pretty menial job or you had a ton of flexibility, like I said, it's not feasible. And I think that a lot of people don't really realize that. And I'm totally that person when I moved here. Oh my gosh, because every time I've been here before, I wasn't working,
Right.
and so you kind of have this expectation. And then I started a full-time 40-hour work week and I'm like, this is kind of like living in Ohio again, So, and of course you have your pros and cons of every place that you live. And like I said, I'm so grateful to live here, but I think that people just have to be realistic. And you can definitely, I mean, Amsterdam is an incredibly social city. There's everything under the sun. You can probably do it here. Always things going on, markets, festivals, whatever it may be. You just have to find that balance. And I think that it's important to also, consider that European salaries are a little bit different from American salaries. You might be making 100K in the US, but you might be making 70K here. And that's probably on the higher end, again, depending on your experience, but also something to take into consideration that you might live this lifestyle within the US that might not necessarily be sustainable here, and kind of vice versa, depending on what it is, but also something to keep in mind.
Yeah.